Okay, so I want to just review a little bit, because one of the things I did is I looked back at some of the videos, I zoomed in a little bit, so hopefully you're going to be able to see a little bit more on this more detailed camera that we have. Once again, when we're looking at our shark, we have the lateral line system that runs up to the front here. You can see that line. Here we have our horizontal septum. Dorsal to that we have our epaxial muscles. Ventral to that we have our hypaxial muscles. Here you can see my pectoral abductor, ABD, abductor. On this side you can see once again hapaxial muscles. And here's my pectoral adductor, ADD, ductor. It's going to add it back to the body when it contracts. This one's going to abduct it away from the body. Now we're going to start moving forward, more anterior. I might shift every now and then just to make sure that you can see everything well in the camera. So if there's a pause, that is the why. Notice we have our pharyngeal slits running down the body. If I were to take this muscle and bring it up, take the skin, sorry, and bring it up, you can now see that I have different types of muscle underneath. Surrounding each of those pharyngeal slits are going to be, you ready for this? My superficial branchial constrictor muscles. And on top of that, we're going to add another descriptive word to it. Since I'm on the dorsal side, these are the dorsal, superficial, branchial constrictor muscles. This is the branchial region when we're talking about the pharyngeal slits. We're talking about the gills. We're in the branchial region. And so this is a mouthful, these muscles. You can see here's a muscle, here's a muscle, here's a muscle. But they're describing what they do. They constrict. They close the pharyngeal slits. They're superficial. They're on the outside of the shark's body. They're not deep within. So they're superficial constrictor muscles. And since they're constricting the branchial region, they're superficial branchial constrictor muscles. And because we're towards the top here, the dorsal side, these are dorsal, superficial, branchial constrictor muscles. And there's going to be one associated with each of the pharyngeal slits. The only place that you're not going to have one of those muscles is when you're all the way in the front. All the way in the front here, in front of, anterior to, the very first gill, the very first pharyngeal slit. So here's the head of the shark. This muscle is going to be my hyoid constrictor muscle. And in particular, I am on the dorsal side, so this is the dorsal hyoid constrictor muscle. Let's jump real quick to the ventral side. I go to the ventral side, you can see, especially if I move these around, you can see that clear line right here. These muscles are now my ventral hyoid constrictor muscles. Sorry, my ventral superficial branchial constrictor muscles. And the one in the front is my ventral hyoid constrictor muscle. Posterior, surrounding all of my pharyngeal slits except for the very first one. These are my ventral superficial branchial constrictor muscles. And the one all the way in the front here is the ventral hyoid constrictor muscle. Right here. Similarly, this was my dorsal hyoid constrictor muscle. When I show you these on an exam, I will make sure that you can see where the very first pharyngeal slit is located. So you can orient yourself so that if I were to pin this muscle here, you know it must be the hyoid constrictor muscle. And since I'm on the ventral side, it would be the ventral hyoid constrictor. If I showed this being the first pharyngeal slit, and I were to then label this muscle, or this muscle, or this muscle, or this muscle, then you know it must be a ventral superficial branchial constrictor muscle. We'll come back to the ventral side in just a little bit. Let me repeat those real quickly just to make sure that you can see them. I'm going to place something to allow me to know not to go forward beyond that. Here's my pharyngeal slits. Once again, we'll put the probe in there. These are my ventral superficial branchial constrictor muscles. And when I'm in front of that first pharyngeal slit, the one I'm pinching right now, that would be my ventral hyoid constrictor muscle. I go to the dorsal side, same thing. Let's show that first pharyngeal slit. There it is. So this here, come on, would be my dorsal hyoid constrictor muscle. You can see here's another muscle, here's another muscle. These are very fragile, so they start falling apart. I apologize, but these next muscles, these would be the dorsal superficial branchial constrictor muscles. Whew, mouthful. While we're up here, you can see my epaxial muscles were down here, and you can see they continue up onto the head. But you can clearly see that there is a line right here running down towards the posterior side. This line, and you can then see there's another line here that's separating my dorsal superficial branchial constrictor muscles. I have this muscle, and then I have my epaxial muscles. This muscle that's lying in between those is my cucullaris. My cucullaris. So here's my cucullaris. It's almost like in a pyramidal shape, like a pyramid, pointed up here, and then it broadens as you go down. And it runs all the way down to this cartilaginous structure that's called a raphe. This is the scapular process right here. We learned about the scapular process when we were learning about the pectoral limb. Here's my scapular process. Anterior to that is my cucullaris. Ventral to the cucullaris, here's my dorsal superficial branchial constrictor muscles. Here's that line again. Dorsal to the cucullaris is my epaxial muscles. Okay? We have a few more muscles here. Now, once again, when I pin these on an exam, I'm always going to pin multiple ones to show you that there's multiple muscles associated with a certain spot. If we come up towards the anterior portion of our shark, once again, here's my spiracle. Here's the eye, here's the spiracle. Directly posterior to the spiracle, I'm pinching here. This is going to be my levator hyomandibular. I'm pinching it right here. Levator hyomandibular. Behind that, posterior to that, is once again the dorsal hyoid constrictor. If I go anterior to now my spiracle. Here's my spiracle. You can see there a muscle running anterior to the spiracle. There's two muscles here. The most anterior one is my levator palato-quadrati. The one that's posterior to that and runs right up against the spiracle. You can barely see it here. That's my spiracularis. Spiracularis runs next to the spiracle. Spiracularis, spiracle. Spiracularis, spiracle. They're spelled almost exactly the same. Spiracularis is right up against the spiracle. Anterior to that is the levator palato-quadrati. It runs down to the cartilage that's in the name. Posterior to the spiracle is my levator hyomandibular. So, let's do this real quick. Hold on for just a little bit. If this was an exam, one of the things I could do is pin these four muscles so that you can see that we have four muscles there. And you can, I would normally use two different numbers there. You notice this is 49 and this is 49, 72 and 72. I would use different numbers to associate with different muscles. This is the more anterior one. This is posterior to this one, and it's still anterior to the spiracle. This is posterior to the spiracle, and this is posterior to this one. I can use a series of pins to show you a series of muscles, and that's going to be very helpful with this remote instruction. So once again, levator palato-quadrati, it's going to elevate that cartilage. This is the spiracularis. It runs next to the spiracle, anterior to it. Posterior to the spiracle, I have my levator hyomandibular. Posterior to that, I'm going to have my dorsal hyoid constrictor. All right, lastly, let's go back down to these ventral muscles. If I move this around, once again, you can see here are my ventral superficial branchial constrictor muscles. Here's my ventral hyoid constrictor muscle. Here's my jaw. And here's a muscle associated with the jaw. You can see here's that line that's separating this big muscle from the ventral hyoid constrictor muscle. This big muscle that wraps around the corner of the jaw, this is going to be my adductor mandibulae muscle. Mandibulae for mandible, adductor for adding it back to the body. If we constrict this muscle, it closes the jaw. If I look ventral to all of these, once again, here's that line. Here's my adductor mandibulae. Here I have a sheet-like muscle going across basically the chin of the animal. This is my intermandibularis. Intermandibularis. You can see here once again is my linea alba. And there's a line that runs right down the middle, separating both sides of my intermandibularis. I can take a probe and slide it up underneath my intermandibularis. Same with this side. Intermandibularis. Notice that these big muscles here like two big circles. This is the start of my coracal auriculars. Sitting below that would be my coracoid bar. That's part of the pectoral girdle skeleton. Next, we're going to cut deep to this intermandibularis, and we're going to look at a few deep muscles that are deeper to this superficial intermandibularis.